Welcome everyone to the first virtual Vienna Video Tech Meetup. I'm really happy that we can offer it this way during these times and also allow some people to join in, maybe that are not currently in Vienna. So therefore also broadening the audience a bit. I'm really happy that you're all here. And now getting to the agenda already. First, we will have Christian Feldmann talking about different video codecs. So you see there are a lot of different acronyms there. And I'm really excited about this talk for a look into the future. And the second part will then be done by Christoph Prager, who will talk about why you should have a healthy obsession with startup time. So these are the two main talks that we have planned for today. And at the very end, there will be a general Q&A where you can also ask further questions. Feel free to ask questions in the chat anytime. We will answer them then at the end of each talk, and also in the general Q&A at the end, there is some time left to have some conversations. And I will also be talking then about some general organizational topics, but that's done at the very end. So before I hand it over to the two speakers we have today, I want to talk a little bit about who they are. So first, there's Christoph Prager, who is with me here also in the Bitmovin office. He's the product manager for analytics here at Bitmovin. And especially recently also in our NAB Live and other events, he has been speaking quite a lot already about the different metrics there are for analytics. What are the things you should focus on? And I'm really excited to have him here today. And secondly, then we have Dr. Christian Feldmann, who is also part of Bitmovin. He's a team lead in encoding, and that's another benefit of having this as a virtual meetup, is because he's actually dialing in from Berlin. And I'm also really happy to have you here today and talk about the future of the video codecs. With that being said, I already want to give the word to Christian Feldmann, and I will stop sharing my screen.
And then I can start. Perfect. Share my screen. Screen number 2. That should work, hopefully. Present. All right. Yeah. Thanks for attending like this. As you already mentioned, Marcus, I am located in Berlin right now, so coming live from our office in Berlin. But yeah, I would have preferred actually, I mean, the nicer way would have been a personal meeting, and I would have come by to Vienna, of course, gladly to give this talk in person. But I mean, this is how it is right now, and so let's make the best of it. So yeah, we just do it like this. It's perfectly fine as well. Okay, so what I want to do today is give a little bit of an overview of the video coding landscape, and especially about the emerging video coding landscape. There's some new codecs coming up, some of them which you might have already heard about, and some of them where you might think, what is this supposed to be? But yeah, that's what I want to do in this talk. And we've already seen some acronyms, and I'll go into detail on them and what they mean and what the codecs are supposed to do. So first of all, I want to give a short overview, or this is basically my try on a comprehensive condensation of the most popular codecs out there right now. So these are all codecs which have been standardized, which have been out there, and which have more or less wide applications already. And these are just, this list is by far not complete. There are more codecs out there, but these are just the biggest ones, the most used ones out there right now. The biggest ones, of course, being H.264 AVC. You might know it's almost over 20 years old now, so it has been around for quite a while. And that basically reflects in a few things. There is unbelievable support for AVC, right? You might know AVC runs basically on any toaster. It runs on any platform. It runs. There's a lot of chips out there. System on a chip. CPUs have support for it. GPUs have support for it. So if you have a device which is younger than 10 years, probably there's some sort of hardware decoder in it. If you have a phone or a laptop or a set-top box at home or a TV, there's probably a hardware decoder in there for AVC. It's basically supported on all platforms, but its age, of course, also comes with the coding performance. That's what the bars here are supposed to indicate. Like the coding performance is not that on par. I mean, it's a 20-year-old codec, so the coding performance is not that optimal anymore. It has aged a bit. That also comes with the age of the codec, and yeah. Of course, from the dollar sign is supposed to indicate like the licensing situation. AVC, using AVC is pretty straightforward. There's one licensing agency that you have to pay if you want to use it. That's it. The licensing fees are okay, and it's quite easy to license. And it's basically used everywhere. If you're looking at video, it is most likely AVC that you're looking at. Then, of course, the successor to it, H.265, HEVC, might have also heard about that. It has also been around for quite a while, and there's quite a big, there's also quite a big amount of supported platforms and applications for it. There's a lot of implementations in hardware, CPUs, GPUs. If you have a device which is younger than, like, let's say 2 or 3 years, then probably you also have a hardware decoder for it in your device, if it's a laptop or a TV or a set-top box or a phone. On the browser side of things, the support is not that big because the two biggest players on the market, which are Firefox and Chrome, actually do not have support for HEVC in the browser. The coding performance is, of course, pretty good since it's a much younger standard. On the licensing side, it is much more expensive to use than AVC, but also there's some problems with the licensing of HEVC. As you might have heard, some of the patent holders which have patents in HEVC do not give you a way to license that technology, which is quite a risk to you. And yeah, there's some problems involved with this. But there's a lot of applications for this. So basically, if you are looking at a 4K stream, it is most likely that it has been encoded in HEVC. If you're looking like Netflix, Amazon Prime, or all of those in 4K, it is definitely HEVC. If you're looking at broadcast in more than full HD, that is also all HEVC. So there are a lot of applications for HEVC out there. And then, of course, on the right, we have the two open source codecs, VP9 and AV1. Basically, AV1 is the successor to VP9, if you will. Both started by Google, more or less, or Google bought a company which was developing this. This is how they got this. Both of them have quite a lot of applications where AV1 is still a little behind, just because it is very young. The standardization of it was finished a little over a year ago. So yeah, it always takes a bit of time until a codec really is mature enough, or the implementations of codecs on the encoder and decoder side are mature enough. So for VP9, there's a broad support for it on platforms, in browsers, but also on chips. So there's a lot of system on the chips and CPUs and GPUs out there which support decoding and encoding of VP9 in hardware. And for AV1, the same. There's the first announcements of system on the chip devices which support AV1 decoding, and also GPU support for AV1 decoding. It's already in development. There has not been any announcement of CPUs yet, but that will come at some point sooner or later. The coding performance, of course, is pretty good. VP9 is already pretty good, and AV1 is even better. And the big advantage of these codecs, they are basically free to use. There's no incurred licensing cost, right? So if you use them, you don't have to pay any licensing fees to anybody. There's also a lot of applications for this already. Netflix and YouTube and Facebook are doing experiments with AV1, VP9. If you're watching YouTube on Chrome, it's most likely VP9. There's also some live applications for VP9. Twitch is going to switch to, or also enable, VP9 live streaming for their Twitch platform, which is quite interesting. So they're using a hardware solution, an FPGA solution, basically, to support very ultra low delay live streaming on their Twitch platform using VP9. And AV1 also has some live applications. So yeah, you don't have to think AV1 is just specialized on only VOD stuff. Google Duo, for example, which is a new conferencing tool, will use AV1 also. Okay, so this is supposed to be like an overview of the current coding landscape, and what I want to go into detail for this presentation is 3 other video codecs which are upcoming. So the standardization is either already finished like a month ago at the last Mpeg meeting, or will be finished at the next Mpeg meeting. So all of them are going to be finished within this year, and they are basically essential video coding, low complexity enhancement video coding, and versatile video coding. The last one you might have heard about because that is the successor to HEVC, basically. That's going to be H266 in the end. So I want to go one by one through them. What do they do? Who does the standardization? How do they compare to existing codecs, and what might be the applications for it, right? So let's get started with the first one, Mpeg 5 essential video coding. So this is a pure Mpeg activity. Why is it here? Basically, we can see this from the requirements. So these requirements I just copied from the requirements document, which says this codec needs to have efficiency similar to that of HEVC, designed for real-time applications and OTT. And the biggest point, why is it here, is there should be clear licensing available in a timely manner. As I already mentioned with HEVC, there is this problem that some of the patent holders which have patents in HEVC do not license them to you. They have them, they do not license them. And that is quite a big problem for people who want to use the codec, right? What do you do? Even if you're willing to pay money for it and use them, you can't. And that is a big problem for every codec. And so for EVC, the idea was, how can we tackle this problem to have an incentive for the patent holders having patents in this technology to give out a licensing agreement in a timely manner? And I will go into detail on how they tried to solve this problem here, basically by using two profiles. So there is one baseline profile, which is free, and there is a main profile, which will have licensing fees attached to it. I also have a graph to illustrate this even more. Basically, a video codec is always made up of different blocks, and you need all of them to make up one complete video codec. All current video codecs are based on the on a coding loop, basically on 2 things, on transforms and on entropy coding. So on prediction, transforms, and entropy coding. And these are all like coding blocks, and then you can build up your codec. And that basically applies to all video codecs, all modern video codecs since 25 years. You have this scheme. And some of the basic blocks are, for example, entropy coding, transformations of the residuals, then there's prediction, and then there's filtering in the end somewhere in there. There's also a lot of more blocks, but this is just for an illustration. And if you have all of these blocks together, then you have one video codec and you can use it. And the idea of EVC is you have one baseline profile, which has basic versions of all of these technologies, or all of these blocks that you need in a video codec, and they are all license free. How do you make sure they are license free? Basically, you look what was out there, and then you choose technology where either the people who invented it are willing to give you free licensing of them, or technologies which are 20+ years old, or where the basic idea was formed or was patented more than 20 years ago, and then you have a licensing free technology. So the baseline profile of this codec is made up of blocks which are all license free. And then there's another main profile where some of these basic coding blocks are replaced by more advanced versions, more modern versions, which are not license free. So somebody has invented them and has a patent on them, and you can't just use them for free. And they typically, they replace or enhance existing coding blocks that you already have. And so the question is, why do you have this 2 profile version, because the baseline profile, you can also think it's based on technology which is either very old or very basic. The coding performance of the baseline profile isn't that good. You need some main profile features in order to make it really efficient. The idea is that you can switch on and off each of these advanced filters one by one. So basically at the beginning of the bit stream, there's a big flag mask which says, is advanced transform on or off? Is advanced prediction on or off? Is advanced filtering on or off? And then you can basically individually switch on or off these advanced features. And the idea is that now the standard is finished, and somebody who has a patent in one of these coding blocks is not willing to give licensing for their technology. You can just say, okay, yeah, if you don't want to license this technology, we'll just switch it off. And then it's not used, and then it's not used in the codec, and then you can build a decoder and an encoder which doesn't use the patented technologies. That's the idea. So you have an incentive for the people to give licensing out. That is the idea. And so, yeah, as I said, the baseline profile, which is only using these basic technologies, the coding performance isn't that bad, isn't that good. It's better than AVC, but it's also not as good as HEVC. So if you compare the baseline profile to AVC, you save some bit rate, like 30%-ish BD rate. And the main profile is usually compared to HEVC. And yeah, the main profile compared to HEVC also gives some coding gain, also at some cost for the encoding time and decoding time, so for the complexity. But yeah, that's the idea. And why do we have these two profiles? To have an incentive for timely licensing terms. So after the standard is finished, now this is actually already finished, all of the lawyers will sit down and they will try to figure out how to offer licensing fees for all of the patented technologies, and then they will, I don't know what the lawyers do, but in the end, hopefully each of the companies who has patented technology in this codec will agree on some licensing terms on all of the codecs technologies, so that you, if you want to use it, can go to them and pay them, and then you can use this patented technology. Okay, so the next codec which I want to go into is the low complexity enhancement video coding. And as you can see, the 3-letter acronym days of video coding standards is over. This is already 5. There's 2 key points to this standardization. Of course, there's the low complexity part. So there's something about a very low complexity here. Then there's enhancement. So it is enhancing something. And those are the basic big points of this codec, of the idea of this codec. So the idea is that the basic idea was that you say, okay, we have existing coding technology, but the next version of this is just going to make everything more complex, and it's always getting more complex and more complex. And why can't we make a video codec which is not increasing the complexity of this even further, but is enhancing an existing technology? And that is the idea. So you have there's also like a multi-layer approach to this. It's a little bit like scalable video coding. So we have a base layer bit stream. So we have a base layer bit stream, we have a decoder, and then we can decode a video. This can be any codec, it doesn't matter which one. It can be AVC, HEVC, VP9, AV1, the standard doesn't say. You can combine this with anything. And what is LCEV? What's the enhancement layer video coding now doing? It's building on this basic bit stream that you already have, or on this basic technology. So you take the output of the base layer quality, so the decoded HEVC video, for example. Let's just take an example. Let's say the base layer is H.264 at 720p, and then at a certain bit rate. And then you take the reconstruction of the base layer and enhance it with more information. So you're basically increasing the bit rate, you're increasing the quality of your reconstruction. And for this, LCEVC has multiple layers. There's a L1 bit stream, which encodes a residual signal, which is added on top. So the output of this addition has a higher quality. Then there's the definition of an upsampling filter. So you could filter this up, for example, to 1080p or 4K. And then another round of residual decoding is done and added on top. So you get an even higher quality reconstruction at the higher layer. And that is the basic idea. So the base quality video, for example, in this hypothetical is 720p AVC at a certain bit rate. And then the high quality video can be, for example, 1080p at really nice quality, or 4K at even better quality. And while the whole enhancement layer can be decoded with a very low complexity. And I want to go into an example where this makes a lot of sense. Let's imagine we have a system on a chip. And for the sake of our presentation, we can think about it as a thing with a lot of pins. And inside, there's hardware decoding units for existing standards like VP9 or AVC or HEVC. And there is a general purpose CPU. That's usually how a system on a chip looks like. And these system on a chip devices are in a lot of devices at people's homes. So in set-top boxes, of course, but also in TVs, and of course, like other attachment devices like the Fire TV stick or the Fire TV or Google Chrome Chromebox extensions, which you plug into your TV. Those are all based on system on a chip devices. And internally, they look a little bit like this, or we can imagine they look like this. So you have an existing decoder for HEVC or AVC or VP9, and you have a general purpose CPU. The general purpose CPU is usually not that powerful, so it's not powerful enough to decode a high definition or 4K HEVC stream. But it is powerful enough to do some low complexity things. And that is the idea of the low complexity enhancement video coding, right? So you can combine the two in order to get a much higher reconstruction quality than you would with just the CPU or just the video codec decoder. So you just decode HEVC or you decode AVC at 720p as in our example, and then the CPU would do the low complexity enhancement layer video coding on top, and then you can squeeze out a 4K reconstruction from a system on a chip, which is usually not even able to do this. Plus, you can update this. Over the air, right? It's the low complexity enhancement coding is just the program running. So you can run this on the general purpose CPU, and you can distribute this over the air or with a download, or yeah, there's a bunch of ways to do this. And yeah, now for the coding performance. So it depends, of course, the coding performance of low complexity enhancement video coding depends on what codec you use for the base layer. So if you compare, so we have two scenarios here, which is the base layer is H.264 AVC or H.264 HEVC, and then you're comparing this to a pure encode with AVC or to a pure encode with HEVC at the same quality, of course. And then for AVC, for example, you can save around 36% bitrate, and for HEVC around 9%-ish bitrate. And that this is the cool part. At the same time, you save a lot of computational complexity compared to just decoding or just encoding AVC. So that is the big advantage. You get very high coding efficiency with a lower computational complexity, which is, it's a really cool idea. I mean, from a concept point of view, it's also a really cool idea, and how it works. So it looks like you don't even need all of this motion compensation at the higher resolutions in order to get a good compression efficiency. Slash, it can maybe it even hurts you. So from a conceptual scientific point of view, this is also really fascinating that it works. And the last codec I want to mention new one is versatile video coding VVC. As I already said, this is the successor to HEVC. So this is going to be named H266. The name is not official yet, but that is definitely going to be the name. And if you take a look at the coding, at the code and at how the standardization works, you can definitely see that this is a evolutionary step forward from HEVC. So the wheel was not reinvented for this one. It is basically enhancing all of the individual components in HEVC. So you can see a lot of stuff which was already used in HEVC and now it's used in VVC, and you're just enhancing stuff. It adds more coding tools, it adds more intra modes, more inter modes, more refinement, more advanced technologies, and that's basically it. So I actually do not want to go into detail on this too much, because yeah, that alone could fill like a two-day lecture easily. There's a lot of enhancement in various small areas of the codec, but nothing revolutionary, if you want. And just the thing I want to say for this is, of course, the coding performance. So VVC is always compared, of course, to HEVC, and this is the comparison that they do in the standardization activity. And what you can see is that on a PSNR basis, you get about 40% BD rate reduction compared to HEVC, which is super impressive because HEVC is already doing pretty well. And what also the standardization found out, or what you can see, is that on a subjective scale, the results look even better. So VVC tends to be much more pleasing to the eye, even at lower bit rates. So you can see that the subjective results may be even higher. They will do some experiments on that, and hopefully next meeting we will have some, or maybe in autumn somewhere, we will get some results for a real subjective test, and then we will hopefully see that these are even higher for that. Yeah. So that were the 3 codecs, and yeah, this is just a summary to yeah, I wanna point out a little bit how these fit into the whole overview I gave earlier. So EVC, LCEVC, and VVC, the coding performance of these, and then of course there's still, I mean, for the licensing part, there's still a big question mark, because as I said, the standardization is just finished, or some of them actually are still ongoing, but they will finish soon. And then the licensing negotiations start, and what comes out of them, nobody knows. So we just have to wait. But probably, so all of these standards are going to cost money. None of them are free. And for EVC, you will have to pay money. For LCEVC, you will also have to pay money. And yeah, the dollar plus dollar here means, as I said, LCEVC has this base codec and an enhancement codec. So if you're choosing a base codec, which already has licensing fees, you might have to pay for both. You might have to pay for an HEVC base layer plus an LCEVC enhancement layer. And VVC, yeah, that is definitely going to cost you money. Probably a lot. I mean, last time the step from AVC to HEVC was pretty big. From HEVC to VVC, probably cost is going to increase again, but we don't know. I mean, it depends on what the negotiations, what happens there, right? So yeah, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you, unfortunately. We just have to wait and see what happens. Hopefully a situation as an HEVC doesn't repeat. That would be not so good, but let's see what happens. Yeah, some references about the coding results and everything. I didn't do them myself. They are from the standardization documents, and that is it from my side. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. And of course, I'm open for questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christian. I just also asked in the chat again, feel free please to add any questions while Christian is here. And if there are none now, you can also still ask the questions during the next talk, and we're happy to answer them also at the end of the session.
Yeah, right. I mean, one question which often comes up when you're talking about EVC, for example, or about these codecs is, how do they fit into the coding landscape? What do you even need them for, right? Will they be used? I mean, LCEVC has these cool applications with the system on a chip devices, right? Where you can update them with a newer codec over the air. That's a really cool application. But besides that, is there going to be an application for them? That's a good question. And for EVC also, like if you want to be mean, you could say, what's the niche for EVC even, right? It's a little bit more performant than HEVC. It will cost money. Plus, so it's like, what is the niche here? If you're saying, if you're a content creator and you're like, what am I going to do with this? It's, if I want to have the most efficient video codec out there, I'm going to go for VVC. I'm just going to pay money and then get the best video codec that's out there. That's it. And if I am on a, like, if I'm on a tight budget and you want to save some money, then you would probably rather go for AV1, right? It's free. You can just use it. No licensing fees attached. Yeah. So what's the niche for EVC, right? It's somewhere in between there, but it's a good question.
Listen, sorry, I actually have a question.
Yeah.
Do we already know kind of what about the device support? Will this be kind of similarly fragmented between, as we can see, between VP9 and HEVC, between the Android ecosystem and Apple, even though this is not totally true? But do we know already something around these new codecs, device support and browser support, obviously?
Yeah. No, not really. I mean, we will see really what happens. But one thing that might happen, of course, is that, I mean, VVC again is the standardization of ITU and Mpeg, right? The one side and the other side, the dark side and the light side. I don't know how you want to. Yeah. It depends on what side you're on. Which one is the dark one? And the other side, like the open source free Google based codecs, right? And Google also controls like the open source stuff a bit. So Chrome, of course, the biggest browser out there, and it could very well happen that they would not add support for VVC in there because they want to push their own codecs, like AV1, for example, right? So that could happen. I don't know what Google will decide here. Yeah, we don't know. But that's a likely scenario.
Yeah. No, it's just because when I think the question here is always when looking into practice and then trying to really deploy also those codecs. So the scenario going forward will still be, because today it's H.264 plus a second codec if you want to reach all devices. In the future, this will probably still remain the same, you think?
Could be, yeah. Okay. I mean, AVC is still the most distributed codec, and I think it's going to stay like that for quite a while. Okay. Because it's just the one codec that can reach anybody. Yeah. And then maybe it's going to be replaced at some point. Or you're going to do like, maybe you can also do like, I don't know, VP9 HEVC to spread to 99% of the people, and then it's a really good question. But I think it's definitely going to move to a multi-codec environment. We're not going to have a situation as in, I mean, AVC, for example, at its time was the one codec. It ran everywhere. It was the only one. That's it, right? And yeah, this is not going to happen again. I think that was a world in the past which is not going to repeat itself. You will have to deal with multiple codecs, unfortunately. I don't think that VVC is going to solve this, and that VVC is going to be the one codec that we can use for everything everywhere, and that's it. It's unlikely to happen. The market is just too big, and the application's too wide, and yeah.
All right. Thank you very much for your insights. And that means we continue now with the talk of Christoph. So for that, I will start sharing my screen again.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus, for taking over that.
All right.
Yeah, so hi, everyone. Thanks for having me for the Video Tech Meetup and the Vienna edition. I'm really grateful that we have such a meetup to share the stories and the insights we have, and hope also in the future that we see also presenters from other companies joining in. What I wanted talked about today is something that I've more and more have dove into in the past few months in terms of when it comes to video analytics. Obviously, my background being a product manager for the BitMove analytics product is startup time, and why there is such an obsession in the video world behind that metric, and why I think, and that's kind of what I want to make the case for, that you should actually really have a healthy obsession with startup time if you're in the video space. Next slide, Marcus, please. Something, but before I dive into the metric that I wanted to highlight, I mean, we at BitMove try to really think about like on implementations, but also the way we think is always try to highlight with what are the biggest trends currently in the market, what do we see, and really assign those more specific topics always to those big buckets that we believe are really relevant at the moment. Being in that case for 2010, really being fast in your time to market, really concentrating on operational optimization. And I think Christian's talk really dove into where those optimizations can come in the future in terms of the codec. Well, obviously always depending on the licensing and cost aspects, which is an important factor here as well. And then I think a topic which will be with us, I don't know, forever, but for the near future, having really a better viewer experience. And I will also mention why this is actually becoming more and more important as different audiences also come into and consume video streaming. Can we move please to the next slide, Marcus? Thanks. Yeah, but today it is all about that metric called video startup time, right? It's all about diving deeper into that metric that I think everyone in the space, video space, should have top of his or her mind, or as I said, even obsess about it. Obviously, kind of a caveat up front, obsession is obviously negatively connotated, and it's always I use it in the fun term just to avoid any confusion. So I would say have a healthy obsession with. So you should not think about startup time the whole time. Yeah, let's start off with the next slide about the definitions, right? Startup time actually, and this also depends on which tool you look, which provider of analytics you take into consideration, or where you read up, has different synonyms, right? We've here definitions. We have terms like startup delay, join time, startup time, and then, and this will something I will look upon later, is even video player startup time. So startup time referring more closely to the source where it comes from. As I would suggest to going forward, I would suggest a working definition for the talk, right? About what we at BitMove define as video startup time, which is actually defined as the time from when a user presses the play button until he or she really sees the first frame of a video. And I think I just propose for the talk, I propose we have this joint definition because also, and that's why we believe at least that it's most useful, because it has a viewer-centric view on the experience and not a technical one. So it's obviously, it quantifies, so to say, what's happening on the viewer side, not obviously on what happens underneath. So that's why we go with that viewer-centric definition. Okay, so now that we have decided or kind of defined the term, let's move on to a few assumptions that are out there about startup time. And these assumptions also kind of bring us to the questions why we should obsess about it, right? From the following definition that we had on the last slide, we see that startup time is a measure of capturing the time a viewer has to wait until he or she really can access the content they wish to wait for. It's really a measure of the time that the viewer has to spend waiting. And obviously there are a few assumptions about human behavior that suggest the longer the startup time, so the longer the viewer has to sit in front of the TV or in this room, however they consume it, their desktop or their mobile, the longer they sit in front of that, they will abandon your app, your website, whatever. In short, viewers are really impatient, right? That's general assumption or hypothesis we can take, and I will show you some data in a second that will show this as well. Also, and this is something that's important for the video space in general, so if you have a video platform, it's something that we see with increased bandwidth conditions, and I think COVID-19 has showed us that like increased bandwidth conditions are often or bandwidth conditions in general are still a topic for us, especially when one person is streaming and one is Zooming or having a meetup in the living room. Second person is having a meetup in the living room. So bandwidth is still a topic, but with increased bandwidth conditions under normal conditions, there is a feeling of immediacy with minimal loading time that has really become core to the internet experience as well. And this further underlines the need for fast startup times. And there's several data around websites and around the conversion rates that are tied to the website loading. So it has become a general measure, important measure also in the internet. And also, and I think that's sometimes underestimated, as broader and more non-tech savvy audiences really consume more video streaming, there is a certain competition going on with the offline experience. So with your day-to-day and back in the days, if you're old enough to remember, channel switching. And I think there's also a weird conception about that there was really minimal loading time to the channel switching without having the hard data on that. But this competition with the offline experience becomes also more and more important, that everything works, there's no error, and everything, the startup time is really fast. But these are all just assumptions. Going maybe 2 slides already further, let's look at some data that really shows why obsessing with startup time is really important, and that really also addresses that connection between waiting, abandonment, and startup time. One example that I wanted to highlight here, and this is from a podcast that Daniel Ek, the founder of Spotify, did with Reid Hoffman, called Masters of Scales, where he talks about how they built Spotify and how startup time was such an important metric for them. Obviously, Spotify, a company everyone knows as the spearhead of audio streaming, although not the first. It has really an interesting story that is related to that. They, and this is kind of in the words of Daniel Ek, operated really under the promise that only a real-time experience of listening to music will bring users to online streaming and will keep them using streaming as a source for audio. Obviously, please consider that this has been around 2006, 2008 timers, so this was well ahead of video. And they always operated under the objective of bringing down startup time to a threshold of around 200 milliseconds, right? So from pressing play to hearing the first tone, or at least seeing the first second, 200 milliseconds. A threshold that Daniel Ek identified as the perceived real-time threshold. And looking at video, some of you really might be shocked about the 200 milliseconds value. And I can assure you, in that story, they never brought it down to 200 milliseconds themselves, more to 500 milliseconds to a second range. But I think two aspects, how much they contributed to the success of Spotify is an open question. But the core takeaway, though, is that they really also experimented with different ways of enhancing the startup time, not really enhancing the hard data, but also letting the scrubber, for example, start earlier than it actually started, kind of making the user perceive, it's just like making the user think that the audio already has started, even though the data wasn't loaded yet. And I think it's an interesting approach to startup time. And I would advise everyone to listen to that story on the podcast I mentioned. But obviously, this is an example from the audio world, and we're dealing with video every day, and everyone involved knows how different this is actually, right? So what is the benchmark study for video? On the next slide, maybe let's have a look. And that benchmark study, and it has been cited, if you go to DMAX or something, is still the main study that is cited in that domain, the startup time domain, comes from Akamai. In their white paper, Maximizing Audience Engagement. And this study is from 2012, re-released 2014, but also quite old already. What they found is that for every additional second of startup delay, around 6% of the viewership leaves, right? So you can quickly get so if you every second that an additional 6% leaves, you can quickly do the math in your head how long it takes till all of your viewership is gone. You have some time to at least retrieve some of your audience, but you have to be quick. This is not only relevant for ad support use cases, but obviously also for subscription-based, because also this is mentioned in the study as well. The chance of return decreases also significantly when they experience bad startup time. However, the study was created in 2012, which is quite old. So maybe let's look at some more recent data on the next slide, please. Well, what we see here is data that comes from Ben Dodson from Snap, the company that does the social media platform Snapchat. And he presented this at last year's Demaxed. 2019 Demaxed. And it suggests actually that the 6% per second that Akamai found is actually quite generous in terms of, so the viewers that they tested there were quite generous. If you look at the example here, you see that within 2 seconds of stalling and 2 seconds of a snap stalling, all viewers have abandoned the snap that they were trying to view, right? So just within 2 seconds, all the snap viewership is gone. And to be fair, this is very context dependent data. I don't know if you use Snapchat or Instagram, which has a similar story mode, but especially for Snapchat, is a very specific context where you snap through all the stories. Also, the length of the video is pretty different, and also there are certain consumption patterns with the skipping, which make that data set very specific. But I think it's not entirely unusable to infer to a larger population, but it suggests 2 things, right? We can hypothesize that today we will lose more than 6% of our user base with every additional second of startup delay. So I think the hypothesis to be tested is users are even more impatient, and we will probably need a new Akamai study. So whoever does it in the end, probably use case specific. We need newer data, which is not 8 years old to test that hypothesis. But these we had now the audio example, we had the benchmark study that is 8 years old, and we've looked at really recent very context specific data. What does our data say? On the next slide, I prepared a snapshot from what we call industry insights in Bitmoving Analytics, which is a tool that gives customers a benchmark, what we see across our customer base. So this is across the entire data set of all analytics customers. And what we see here is that in Bitmoving Analytics, the video startup time is around, the median value for video startup time is around 1.5 seconds across all customers. Obviously, this is a dynamic value that changes also in the benchmark, but considering that the 200 milliseconds threshold that Spotify originally identified as the real-time threshold, and the data we saw from Snap, this is actually miles away, right? And this is real data from today. It's not something that's 8 years old. We see the 1.5 seconds quite good for the Akamai study, but for Snapchat, almost everyone will be gone, at least within 0.46 seconds. So what's important, I think, and this is important for analytics in general, and I just wanted to show you in the next slide real quickly, actually looking at startup time needs to be addressed in a more granular way, right? We just looked at video startup time to begin with because it's easy also to explain, but loading and the source of loading can come from various points in your video workflow or in your video chain, so to say. We have video startup time, which is obviously a very complex metric in terms of influencing factors, from the bitrate ladder to the ABR logic to the CDN, the bandwidth available. That's something you can really control in the end with your settings. And on the encoder side, you have player startup time, where you can adjust the player size, which is a kind of a factor also of the web page or the app where it's used. But then you have also loading times that come from parts that you actually don't control so much. There's DRM load time. So how long does it take for the DRM licensing server to process a request? And this puts loading time on top of your workflow as well. And then there's loading time from the ad world, which is looking at the data even more or less trustworthy in that respect. Loading time from the ad tech load time, but also from the media, from the specific ad that loads. On the next slide, I just wanted to highlight real quick, for DRM load time, obviously this is more related to SWOT use cases where content is really licensed and it's really expensive content that needs digital access, digital rights management in order to protect the content. You pay so much, but for the content pieces, and you really need to protect. But giving you kind of an insight here in showing the screenshot on the right, which is actually real data from a licensing server, showing from a live use case here. DRM servers are, when they put on the load, really prone to delaying the whole workflow. And this, you can see these spikes. It wasn't that long because actually the service provider interfered really quickly, but that spiked up to 8 seconds of DRM load time, adding to your total startup time, adding to users waiting for ages to receive, to really access the content. And then again, bringing this back to the data we showed before, probably not so many people would have waited if this was in different situations. And this was kind of a live stream that they were eagerly waiting. So that's probably also why users waited so long. And then another aspect I wanted to highlight and I already touched upon it, maybe on the next slide you can see here as well, is the ad startup time. So the startup time that comes from the ad workflow, obviously it's kind of separated, but nonetheless, if you think about the user flow, if there is an ad or even in between on a preload or pre-roll or mid-roll or post-roll, there is loading time for the user, at least from the experience perspective. And you kind of imagine you build your workflow, everything really works well and everything is really tuned nicely so that the users kind of slide through the experience. And then, okay, you tested it, now you add an ad on top of it that you actually can't influence, right? And so it's important to also have visibilities to your partners and really see what ad server, what media server, how are they performing, and to control that part of it, even though you don't have influence over it. So kind of summarizing, it's important, maybe Marcus, you can go to the next slide. It's important to really have startup time in check. It's not about just having understanding of the relationship between startup times and viewer abandonment. It's also about knowing where the startup time comes from, because obviously you can optimize, and I think that I tried to make that point, and I hope I got it across. You can really optimize your own workflow if you rely on partners and they really add to it. Your optimization is probably not in vain, but let's say at risk. Yeah. However, and again, I think we showed this as well through the pinpoints. Startup time and benchmarking, just wanted to caveat this a little bit, is very use case dependent. So if you have a publisher use case or you have an SWOT use case within an app or with even a smart TV app, that's pretty different. And the benchmark data is also different when you look at that. And the last point I wanted to bring across, probably we need a study. So I don't know if we will be the one making that study at some point or someone else, but I think just for the community itself, we need more updated data on the relationship between startup times and viewer abandonment, because we know actually there's a clear relationship and we need to visualize that better. Yeah, and I think, thank you so much for your attention. 3 minutes to the clock. If you have any questions, happy to answer them. Other than that, over to you again, Marcus, and thanks for having me.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any open questions? Okay.
Obviously, if anything comes up later, feel free to reach out to me or all the channels, LinkedIn, email. Yeah, pretty easy to find.
Cool. Then I will quickly jump to the general topics, organizational part. The first one is, please really fill out the survey I will send out to help this community grow. So there I just ask for some information about which topics you're interested in and kind of like what we can do to make this also, I think, interesting in the future, to keep on with the topics that we have. In that regard, I'm also calling for speakers. So for everyone who is on the call, if you feel like you have an interesting success story in your company or something you tried, miserably failed, I think these are especially also interesting topics to talk about and to tell others, to kind of like make the learnings together rather than everyone on its own. And so if you want to speak at one of the next events, I already linked the next meetup here as well, which will be in September. Please just reach out to me and we can arrange that then. We have various different talk lengths, so whatever basically comes to your mind and what fits you best will be something that we can make happen. And so then for the last part also, I want to call for co-organizers. So if somebody wants to also organize this together with me, and hopefully one of the next meetups will be able to do that in person again, I'm really also looking forward to anybody who is ready to help making this community grow as a co-organizer. Please reach out to me and we'll talk from there.
Yeah, just also kind of reiterating what you said, Markus. I think we want to push the video ecosystem, video tech ecosystem in Vienna. This is not supposed to be a kind of an advertising event for Bitmovin. We're really interested in your stories, and I think the ecosystem is growing, and so should also this community. So please step forward, and we're really interested in your stories, whether we have something to do with each other or not. That's not a dependency requirement.
Absolutely right. Yeah, thanks. Okay. Well then, thanks again to the two speakers, Christian and Christoph, and thank you for everyone who joined. And hopefully we'll see you at the next meetup. Have a nice evening then. Thank you.
Everyone.